Welcome. In this video, we're gonna comment a movie called Death Wish.
For more videos like this, subscribe and click the notification bell.
Instead of saving lives, the surgeon takes them. We see a cop barely driving his partner to the hospital. Dr. Paul tends to the injured officer. Unfortunately, there isn't much he can do. The partner feels guilty, but he tried his best. A nurse calls out to Paul. He needs to focus on the shooter now. As he walks off, the officer yells, "So you're gonna go save that monster now?" Indeed, he will. At home, Paul has a look at his broken watch while chatting with his wife Lucy. Then they hear an excited screech from their daughter Jordan. She comes down acting all calm and cool, then bursts with joy. She got accepted to her dream college. They're so proud of her. Later they go to Jordan's soccer game, where one of the parents is behaving puffed up. He starts yelling at the ref and swearing aggressively. Paul advises him to calm down and prescribes a chill pill. The man counters, wanting to prescribe his fists. It almost escalates into a fight, but Lucy steps in, defending the timid Paul. After they go out for lunch, they're all excited for Jordan to start college. Outside the restaurant, Frank approached Paul for $2,000 to settle some debts. In the past, he was convicted of some crimes. As the good brother he is, Paul accepts. Then the valet comes, and Frank makes a joke that Paul's the one with all the money. So the valet inspects Paul and his family. The man, Miguel, searches up Paul's address in his car and takes a photo with his phone. Also, he's got his initials tattooed on his arm, a detail to keep in mind. Sometime later, the family gets ready to head out to celebrate Jordan's birthday. However, Paul receives a call. He's gotta go to work. It's sad, but they understand. The ladies cheer themselves up by shopping. Lucy wants to cheer Jordan up with a homemade cake. Jordan heads up to get her iPad, but it's not in its usual spot. Then Lucy sees one of the windows are open. Her suspicions begin to grow as she notices soiled footsteps in the house. Suddenly, Jordan screams. The full reality of the situation rapidly sets in. 3 eerie masked men have broken in, and they take the ladies hostage. The leader knocks as Lucy take him to the safe. While Jordan is left with Joe and Fish, Jordan seizes the opportunity and attacks with a knife. Lucy runs down soon after and throws boiling water on Fish. In retaliation, the men open fire. At the hospital, Paul is informed of 2 new victims. When he tries to check on them, he is stopped, but he understands what that must mean. He rushes over to Lucy. Unfortunately, she is gone. As far as Jordan, she's in a coma. Paul later meets with some detectives, Kevin Raines and Leonard Jackson, who launched an investigation into Lucy's murder. After all this, Paul is having trouble sleeping, so he goes to therapy. She assists him through his trauma and offers some advice on getting a good night's sleep. Although he is aware that recovery is a process, but isn't sure what the outcome is. His wife is dead, his daughter is in coma, and he feels like he failed. Paul later inquires about the case with the police force. Luckily, he arrives just as Kevin is getting water and gets buzzed in without an appointment. Kevin's wall is covered in sticky notes, open cases left unanswered for months. Despite this, Kevin promises Paul's case is different. Kevin exhorts Paul to wait patiently and have faith, but this just makes Paul feel even more helpless. At night, he decides to go for a walk. Then he notices 2 men harassing a woman. He intervenes and stops them from hurting her, but they turn their attention to him instead. They beat him up pretty bad and leave him lying sidewalk. Throughout his recovery period, Paul notices an ad on TV for a gun store, and he takes an interest in getting a weapon. He goes to the store and talks to Bethany, who explains the process of having a gun. Basically, you're fine if you have a pulse. Though he sees all the security cameras and the fact that the gun and its bullets will be traceable back to him, and decides against buying one. Another day at the hospital, another gunshot victim, but this time, the thug drops a gun. Paul quickly kicks it under. He manages to bring it home undetected and proceeds to figure out how it works. In the day, he saves lives, and at night, he's getting ready to take them. One night, he checks up on Jordan and finds that her condition has worsened. She's currently having seizures. As a precaution, she's been restrained to the bed. Paul recognizes the irony. His daughter is essentially handcuffed while the animals that did this to her are free, enjoying their lives. It's time to act up. Paul puts on a hoodie and heads out looking for trouble. He soon witnesses a carjacking take place as 2 criminals beat a man and take his girlfriend in their car. Paul yells, and they respond with bullets right away. He shoots back at the car, causing it to crash. Then the kickback of the gunslide cuts his hand. In the meanwhile, someone is recording him. This will undoubtedly go viral. One of the carjacker exits the car and starts firing randomly. Paul waits for the right moment, then pops him down. He walks over, looms over him, and puts him down for good. Then Paul approaches the car and checks on the driver. He's down too. Hours later, the detectives arrive on the scene. After speaking to the witness who recorded the incident, they learn that video was in fact a viral hit. Paul enjoys seeing his handiwork for himself at home. The next day, while driving to work, Paul turns on the radio. They're all talking about his valiant vigilante ways. They even dub him the Grim Reaper. At work, Paul tends to a boy who's shot on the leg. He tells Paul that this so-called ice cream man did this to him because he refused to sell drugs. Paul checks the boy's address, then tells him that everything is gonna be fine. As promised, Paul arrives at the turf while Chief Keef is bopping in the background. Paul finds the street name and then goes to find the man. He introduces himself as his last customer, before dumping his load all over the man. The reaction following this is mixed. While some people find vigilantes to be cringe, others believe it to be based. Kevin and his partner arrive on the scene and notice some kids acting out the scene. Kevin sees that the boy is shooting with his left hand. He reviews the Reaper's footage and discovers that the mystery man is indeed left-handed. Back at work, another gunshot victim is brought in, and this time, it's Miguel, whom Paul recognizes from his tattoo. While Paul uses a defibrillator on him, he notices a rather familiar watch. It's his. It's snooping time now. Paul takes Miguel's phone and uses his thumb to open it. Inside, he finds the picture of his address on the phone. He also searches through his contacts and finds that all the stolen items from the safe are being sold at a pawn shop. So Paul pays a visit and speaks to the owner. He mentions Miguel, leading him to get suspicious. As he circles around Paul, he notices that his hoodie has a morgue tag on it. He casually texts Fish to inform him of the unexpected doctor visit. Paul asks him if he has any watches. The guy says yes. He goes to reach for an strange gun-shaped one. Then Paul attacks, stabbing his hand. He forces him to take him to his belongings. He takes Paul to the back to find his stuff. But soon after, Fish arrives and tries to shoot Paul. Instead, he pops Ponytail. Fish and Paul exchange gunfire, but Paul's gun jams. Fortunately, Fish slips on some water. Then Paul attacks Fish with the guitar. Fish flees, but just as he's about to taste freedom, Paul manages to tag his leg. Fish tries to weasel his way out of Paul's fury by giving up Joe, who he reveals works at a local auto shop. Suddenly Fish attacks. Paul is stunned and accidentally fires a shot off. The bullet hits a bowling ball which begins to roll. Fish approaches, but he gets bonked. Paul is sure to get the hard drives before fleeing the scenes. At home, he watches a tutorial on how to erase the data inside. After, the media frenzy continues. There are even memes of the Reaper now. At work, Paul receives a visit from the detectives. There's been a break in the case. A man named Fish got fried, and they found the pawn shop with all his belongings. Of course, he already knows all this, but appears surprised. After, Paul goes to the garage where Joe works. Joe rudely tells Paul it's closed. So Paul takes a wrench and hits his off button. Paul then places Joe under the vehicle, which is being propped up by a crowbar. Joe is soon giving up answers. He reveals that Knox was the mastermind behind the entire thing, but he isn't someone who is easily found. With all the information he gets, Paul yanks the chain and condemns Joe to a car coffin. The detectives pay Frank a visit in the meanwhile. They think he's the Reaper. He's left-handed, has a reason, and not such a clean record. We cut to Paul chilling with Jordan. He receives a text message. An unknown number is threatening to reveal the truth about him. The phone rings. It's Knox. He asks Paul to meet him at a club, fearing for his brother. Frank checks in on Paul, but he doesn't seem to be home. Frank lets himself in and stumbles upon Paul's mess of a basement. He sees bullets and realizes what's really going on. Back to Paul. He arrives at the club and is instructed to meet at the restroom. Inside, he calls the phone and aims. He shoots while everyone else flees in fear. The stall opens. It's vacant. Suddenly, Knox appears from behind, firing away while shielded by a human. Paul takes cover, but doesn't fire back, fearing for the innocent. Then he spots an electrical box and shoots it out. In the cover of darkness, Paul runs away. Later, Knox ends up in the hospital and the detectives show up to question him. He says he knows who the shooter was. Before he exposes the name, we come back to Paul, dealing with his own injuries. With his willpower, he manages to patch up his own wound. In the meantime, the detectives barged into Paul's empty office. Paul is in fact headed towards his basement where he meets Frank. They have a heart-to-heart. Of course, Frank wants him to put an end to it all and focus on doing what's best for Jordan. Then the cops come knocking. Frank answers the door and makes up an alibi for Paul. They have no choice but to leave. Back in the basement, the brothers continue to argue when Paul takes a call. Jordan woke up. Paul rushes over and unfortunately has to break the news about her mother. On the bright side, Jordan is physically well and can go home soon. 1 week later, the two are heading toward the elevator. Just as the door is about to close, Knox walks in. He knows exactly who they are, but Paul doesn't. He never saw his face. He makes small talk with Jordan, then calls Paul by name as they go. Not good. Paul then goes to Bethany to get some weapons. After Jordan gets home, Knox comes to the house with 2 other goons. Jordan hides in the closet while Paul deals with them. He kills the 2 goons, but Knox is nowhere to be found. Paul checks the basement then gets surprise attack. After, she pops out of her hiding spot and runs over. Knox gets distracted and Paul seizes the moment. He opens a nifty compartment under the table to pull out a huge gun and knocks him down. After the detectives arrive, Kevin questions Paul about the guns as he tells him what happened. Although Paul's story is clearly suspicious, Kevin decides to make up a story that Knox returned because he thought Jordan would recognize him. Later on, Paul drops Jordan off at college. On his way out, he sees a man who just committed a robbery. He calls to the man and pretends to shoot him with his finger. For more videos like this, subscribe and click the notification bell. And don't forget to hit the like button. Also, you can check our other videos. Enjoy and take care.